Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'd like to take you through the year with my poinsettias here. I'll be showing you me pruning them back, two different types of prunings. I'll also be talking about when you should prune, what type of prune you should do, and also the signs to look out for to know it's time to prune. I will then show you later in the year to show you how it responds and what the growth will look like, and then I'll be also talking at the very end of the year how to put it back into flowering, and then showing you how my poinsettia plants then coming back into flower and looking nice for Christmas time. So I've got two poinsettias at the moment. This one I've only had for about 6 months. The other poinsettia I've probably actually had for about 5 years, and it's much bigger, a lot leggier. So the two types of pruning I'd basically like to show you is one where you just cut it really hard and it keeps it around about the same size every year. The other kind of pruning is if you want to get to a larger plant but you still want to keep the shape and have it bushier and have it looking nice. Now when it comes to poinsettias, the timing is quite important. You want to enjoy the flowers for as long as possible before you cut them back, and you also want to make sure the plant is just starting to come into new growth before you prune it as well. These plants go dormant over winter. They really don't like the winter in most climates. They're a subtropical plant. They're like warm temperatures all year round, and although in the winter where they come from it's slightly cooler and it's a lot drier and they have a dormant period, the light levels are too low and often the temperatures are a bit low in many of our houses, so it doesn't tend to do too well over winter. So you certainly want to wait until new growth starts to appear. For most people it will probably be early to mid-spring. It just depends on your climate. I'm in North Scotland. Everything always happens much later here because we have a cool climate with bad light conditions. So that's why I'm doing mine so late in the year, but other people might even be able to do it at the end of winter. It just depends on your climate. So you'll be looking for new green growth coming through. So you can see the old red leaves here. These are the ones that it had for the nice display over Christmas. What you're looking for is new green growth. You can see here these are just starting to come through now. If you look back with the history of these leaves, 3 leaves ago we had a small red leaf, which is this one here. Then we had this one which was kind of half green, half red, so I knew that it was just starting to come into the green phase. That's why it's such a dark leaf, because it's half green, half red. And then the newest leaf, which is this one here, is a nice green colour, and that tells me it's coming into the growth phase and it's ready for pruning. Now when it comes to pruning poinsettia, there's a couple of precautions that you'll need to take. It does have latex sap, which can be quite a nasty irritant if you're allergic or have allergies to latex. And even if you don't have allergies to latex, it is slightly toxic, so you don't want to be getting the sap on your skin. So make sure you wear gloves. Also, I would prune the plant when the soil is slightly dry to reduce the amount of bleeding that the stems will do, because they will produce quite a lot of latex sap. And also, either prune it outside if it's a warm enough day, or make sure you've got something to cover the ground to stop the sap from sticking to things. It will ruin wooden surfaces and carpets, and it will cause nasty stains, so make sure you have them covered. The prune I'm going to do with this is I'm basically wanting to bring this back to about the same size next year. So this would have been grown in a nursery as a small cutting. That small cutting was then cut off around this height here. What that did is it encouraged about 5 or 6 new stems to grow up and produce the shrubby plant that we have now. So what I'm going to do is cut this back to a similar level, and then when it resprouts I'll just decide which stems I want to keep and allow it to grow. When it comes to poinsettias, the more stems you have, the smaller the leaves will be. So if you want really big red leaves, you just want to reduce it to 1 or 2 stems. If you want lots of small leaves, then you can have more stems, you'll just have small leaves. The overall appearance isn't too different, because all the new leaves, although they'll be smaller on more stems, you'll have a lot more of them, so you'll still get a similar appearance. The whole plant should still go red, but it's just personal preference if you want big leaves or small leaves. So with this I'm probably just going to go for large leaves. I'm going to cut it back quite hard. That will allow it to grow to a similar size next spring, and then each stem that's been cut will produce several new shoots. I'll just reduce them to 1 stem each, and then I'll have larger leaves similar to the appearance I have now. So when it comes to pruning, it doesn't matter too much where you prune, but I'll show you on the stem the ideal location. So you can see on the stem you have these nodes. The nodes are right next to where the leaves used to be. You can see the right hand side there is actually the scarf from where the leaf used to be, and just to the left of that there's a small spot. That's usually where the new stem will grow from. So what you want to do is cut it just above one of those points. So you just want to get the secateurs and cut it just above. That way it will grow up from that section and you won't have lots of dead stem at the top. So I'm just going to go ahead now and cut this whole thing quite low down and get a nice compact plant. So this type of pruning is very drastic. Ideally, I would probably recommend not doing this kind of prune unless you know your plant is very healthy, it's in the full growth phase, and it's doing well. If it's at all stressed or anything, this could easily kill off your plant. But as I say, as long as it's a healthy plant and you're just doing it with stems that are only 1 or 2 years old, a hard prune like this should be absolutely fine. It'll respond by putting out lots of new shoots. So what I need to do now with this is put it in a nice warm location, give it plenty of light. I don't need to feed it yet, but once the new growth starts to appear and grow to about 1 inch or so in length, or 2 or 3 centimeters, then I'll probably give it a small amount of houseplant feed, or any kind of either feed high nitrogen or well balanced feed, and that will just encourage it to put on some strong growth. Then once the plant gets a little bit bigger in summer, then I can always repot it and improve the soil and allow it to grow larger. But if I want to keep it small, I can just keep it in that same size pot. That will reduce how much it will grow. Now at this stage, if you really wanted to, you could also take cuttings with the poinsettias. That's always an option with the cut material. So this is my other poinsettia plant. It's much larger, as you can see. It's about 5 years old, and it's a bit further ahead in the life cycle. You can see some of the growth here is grown quite a lot of green leaves. Some of the other areas just 1 or 2, but there is quite a lot of good new growth coming on here. It's also growing a few stems from lower down. So what I'm going to show you on this is a less invasive pruning. It's a much safer type of pruning. The hard prune I've just shown you on the other one, and if it's not a nice healthy plant, there is a chance it might die from a hard prune like that. So this prune I'm going to be showing you a bit more cautious pruning. Also, if you do have much older stems on an older plant such as this here, the older the stem, the more difficult it is for the plant to produce new shoots from it. So if you can, try not to do a really hard drastic prune on stems which are several years old. There's a good chance it will resprout, but it just takes a bit longer, and there's a bit more chance that you'll lose your plant that way. So what I want to do in this one is I want to keep it as quite a nice sized plant, but I've got a couple of things that need to be fixed. So there's a broken branch here which has been snapped and damaged, and you can see it's actually growing some new growth from the side. I need to take off this broken branch. Also, some of them are looking a little bit straggly and going off at strange directions, and I just generally want to reduce the height of the plant and bring it down a bit. So I'll first of all cut off any of the damaged or dead sections. So that's all the dead and damaged stems taken off, and I want to think about the general shape that I'm going for. So what I want to do with this plant is take off some of these more straggly growths. I'm going to cut them back to where the stem is coming up straight. So I'll start off with that. This is a bit of a hard prune because if you look, there's not really much coming from the base down there. So there is a bit of chance that won't survive, but I know there will be some green growth left on the plant lower down. So even if there's no greenery on those top stems, at least there'll be these leaves at the bottom which can still photosynthesis and provide energy for the new growth to appear. So it's a bit more of a safe pruning than pruning the whole thing off and having no leaves. There's also this one in here which just looks a little bit messy, so I'm going to prune that down a bit about this height here. So although I actually quite like the way this plant comes off to the side, I feel like I would like to try and bring it in a bit. It's getting a bit lopsided, and the weight is actually making it a little bit unstable. I've also got a nice shoot coming up from here, and if you want to be a bit more cautious with your pruning and you want to make sure the plant survives, if you have got any growth lower back, that's a perfect point to prune off the plant at. What that will do is all the energy that is currently going into this part of the plant and sustaining that will then be refocused into the remaining section here. This section will grow nice and strong and vigorous, and you know you're going to have a good almost 100% chance of survival because you've still got green material. So I have also gone a bit drastic with this. I was hoping to show you a bit more of a gentle type of pruning with this plant, but I think it was just getting so big, so leggy, it really had to be cut quite hard just to get it back to a good shape. So what I'm going to be doing now is putting these in a nice warm location, plenty of light, plenty of heat, keep it somewhere nice and sunny, and there should be lots of new growth within a few weeks' time. It can take up to a month though to see new signs of growth, so just be patient, it should come back. It can be a bit scary though when you're waiting for it to regrow and you've cut so much material off. The other thing to take note of is because you've taken most of the leaves off, this plant won't be needing anywhere near as much water as it did before. A good sign that it's ready for pruning at the beginning of the year is the plant becomes much thirstier when it comes into its new growing phase. Along with the new green leaves appearing, you should notice the plant is demanding a lot more water than normal. That's a good sign that it's ready for pruning. But because you've taken all those leaves off, it doesn't need as much water anymore. You want to be quite careful with the watering. Although you don't want the compost to dry out, you certainly don't want it to stay wet. So you want to allow the top layer of compost just to dry out slightly in between waterings. So you'll find you'll be giving it a lot less water until the growth has come back and it's put on lots of new leaves. It's very easy to overwater at this stage with the plant not needing much, so just be very careful for the next few weeks until you've got some nice new shoots showing. So what I'll do now is I'll come back in a few months' time, I'll show you how the plant has responded, and I'll probably talk about how I've been feeding it and also look into possibly repotting the plant. So it's now 6 weeks later, and as you can see there's been quite a lot of growth. The plant that I had the time lapse on was this one over here. Had that running for about 2 weeks, that time lapse. As you can see, it put up lots of nice new strong growth. The reason why the newest growth was slightly red on that one was because I had that under an incredibly high intensity light, and sometimes when plants are under very high light intensities they have to produce a special chemical to protect them from the strong UV levels, and that's just what that red marking is on some of these leaves. You can see it on this one here. It wasn't turning red because it was about to flower. It's a bit like suntan in humans. If it gets very bright and sunny, some plants produce a pigment just to protect them from the harsh light. And since I took it away from that grow light, you can see the new leaves are nice and green again. This one here was never under a grow light. It never had that intense colour. So the one that was under the grow light has done the best because I gave it perfect growing conditions. You can see here, even though this one was cut right back to just stems and no leaves or shoots, it's resprouted really nicely. What normally happens is it resprouts from all the dormant buds underneath where the cut was, but generally the top shoots become the leading shoot, and once they get growing, the lower shoots get suppressed and they basically stop their growth. The new growth, it sends hormones down to the stems and it suppresses any of the lower growth. So that's why this has happened with this here. The same thing will happen on this one. You can see there's lots of shoots growing up here at the moment. What will happen is 2 or 3 of these will become like a leader shoot. They'll suppress the growth of all the lower down ones, and then we'll just have 1 or 2 shoots. You can see here the only one that was existing shoot was this one here, and this has actually got quite large, but this is resprouted quite well, particularly from this branch at the top here. And this shoot at the bottom didn't have multiple shoots, it just had that one. All the branches that were pruned on this poinsettia have also sprouted quite nicely and got quite a lot of new growth. So as it continues to grow over the summer, you might want to just do a little bit of pruning here and there. If it looks a bit leggy or just has one really long shoot, you can cut that shoot in half just to encourage some more bushiness on the plant. These are both really bushy. I won't be pruning these at least for several months. I don't think I'll need to prune them at all, to be honest, unless they get a bit bigger than what I'm wanting. This one here, I might be tempted to prune this kind of midway through the summer just to reduce the size a little bit if I wanted to keep this a smaller plant because the pot isn't huge. But to be honest, that should slow down the growth anyway, because the size of the pot determines the size of the plant. The plant tries to keep a balance between the size of its roots and the size of its leaves, so if you restrict the size of the roots by having a smaller pot, the plant won't grow quite as big. So what I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to be repotting this one on the right and allowing this to grow into quite a large plant. The one on the left, I'm just going to keep it in its existing pot. This will probably double in size from what it is now, but it won't get much bigger than this. The one on the right, if I give it a much larger pot, this should hopefully be 3 times the size by the end of the year, but we'll just have to see how that does. And when it comes to feeding regime and the environment that I've had these in, I've just had them in a really sunny, warm location. They are tropical plants, they like high temperatures, so I've had them around 30 degrees during the day, 22 degrees at night, and they've really been enjoying that. Sometimes been up to 35 on a very hot sunny day, but full sunlight, lots of heat, that's really what they like to grow well and grow quickly. I've also been feeding them quite a lot as well. And I've been using a balanced feed that's slightly higher on the nitrogen side. The higher nitrogen levels just gives it more rapid growth and it encourages the larger leaves as well. I tend to like the bigger leaves on my poinsettia. If you want to have some really big leaves, what you can do is just reduce all the stems down to 1 stem and then you'll get giant leaves. But with these branching so much, I'm probably not going to get any giant leaves on this. But you can see where there's been multiple shoots forming, you tend to get lots of small leaves, such as this shoot up here. Whereas this one shoot at the back here was just a single shoot, and you can see the leaves are much bigger. So you can determine the shoot size a little bit with the amount of feed that you give it. If you get high nitrogen feed, you get larger leaves, and if you reduce it to just 1 or 2 shoots for the whole plant, you'll also get larger leaves. So that's one way of controlling the leaf size. So I'll see you now in a few months' time, probably towards the end of summer, see how the growth is going then, see if I maybe need to do any pruning or not, and then we'll be getting it ready for going into its flowering stage. But for now I'm just going to repot this one on the right. I'll keep feeding them both with the balanced feed, which is slightly higher in nitrogen, just to continue that rapid growth, and this one on the right should hopefully be much bigger the next time you see it. So it's now a few months later, and as you can see the plants are at quite a large size now. It's just the beginning of September, so this is really getting towards the end of the growing season, and I want to start switching them over to flowering so I can get that nice colour ready for Christmas. So the timing of this will vary depending on where you are in the world. If you have a slightly warmer climate, it'll take less time to get the flowering ready for Christmas time. Here in Scotland I find it does take quite a long time, especially as it comes into the autumn months. The temperature in my house is quite cool, the light levels are quite low, and normally when it comes into flowering, it just starts to flower around Christmas time. It doesn't flower fully really until around about New Year or even into January, February time. So I'm going to accelerate it this year. Normally I just let it do it naturally, and the thing that mainly triggers poinsettias into flowering is the length of the day. So basically they know that it's coming into autumn. When the days are shorter than the nights, the plant then starts getting ready to flower, and depending how warm it is how quickly it then fully comes into its flowering stage. So what I'll be doing with these is I'll actually be putting mine under a grow light, because my light levels are very bad here in North Scotland. It'll really start to slow down, and as I say, the flowering will tend to be January, February time. If you don't have a grow light and you're not anywhere as far north as Scotland, just put it on a sunny windowsill. Wait until probably about October time. You don't want to have it on with too much direct sunlight. If you're in somewhere with a really hot midday sun, avoid the really harshest midday sun. And if you're somewhere that's got a relatively mild climate, you should find it will flower by Christmas. If you're finding that it's not going to flower in time, you can either increase the temperature to make it flower faster, or you need to start next year the introduction to the darker days earlier. So what you can do is you can draw your curtains earlier at night time. Also make sure it's away from artificial light sources. Even quite a low light from an artificial light can trick you into thinking it's summertime. So don't have it in a living room where you have bright lights on in the evening. Try and put it somewhere where it doesn't have that artificial light. And even if you have very bright street lamps, it can also interfere slightly. So try and keep it away from artificial light if you can, so that it will get into the natural cycle. It really needs that long dark period. And it's good to also drop the temperature slightly. Now you definitely don't want to go below about 10 or 12 degrees Celsius. But you want to be around 20 to 25 degrees during the day, probably about 18 to 20 degrees at night. That drop in temperature will just help it to flower, and it will give it a slightly better colour to the bracts. But as it is a subtropical plant that's very sensitive to cold, never to go below 10 degrees, otherwise it will suffer. And it will flower in higher temperatures. It will flower faster in higher temperatures, but the colours just might not be quite as intense, and you might not get such a full flowering. But generally it's the length of the day that's the big indicator for the plant that it's winter, not so much the temperature. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put mine, as I say, in a grow box. The other thing to do is to reduce the watering slightly. Where this comes in the wild, it has a dry season over winter, so still keep it fairly well watered, but just reduce it slightly, let it to dry out slightly in between watering. In the summertime, as I have been doing with the last few months, I give these plenty of water. I never let them fully dry out. I only let them get slightly dry and then I water again. They're mostly damp all the time. And I'll be giving it a high nitrogen feed. I'm now going to switch to a balanced feed. It still needs quite a bit of nitrogen, because although it's coming into the flowering season, the thing that gives it the colour is actually the leaves, not the flowers themselves. So it still needs quite a lot of nitrogen in its feed. I'm just going to reduce the feed slightly because it's going to be slightly drier and slightly lower temperatures, so it won't need as much feed as I did before. And I'm going to be putting mine in a grow box just to simulate the day-night cycle, and also to give it brighter light conditions, because where I'm in Scotland the light conditions aren't ideal. So I'll come back in a few months' time, we'll see how they've grown. So it's now a few months later, and as you can see they're back in full flower again. The date now is actually the 2nd of December, so I've managed to time it perfectly this year, so I'll be able to enjoy them all of December and into some of January as well. Especially if I keep these slightly cool and without too much light, they're going to stay in that flowering phase, and they're not going to start growing any new green leaves for quite some time. So that's one of the good things with poinsettias. If you have got them and they have survived the cold shock, then they will generally keep their colour for several months. And as an example, when I pruned this in the beginning of the year, it was well into spring and it still had some nice red colour to them. So this will last for a nice long time now. So you can see they've both done well. The one on the left is a little bit leggy at the base now. So what I can probably do differently next year, you can see there it's quite leggy at the base, is actually give it a second prune kind of midsummer time. That second prune midsummer, what that would do is it would just keep it a bit more compact, stop it from growing too tall. The plant on the right is particularly large. It doesn't look that big in the video here because of the angle, but if I take the camera down you'll see the size better. So I did always want this one as a slightly larger plant, and you can see there it is actually quite a decent size. It comes out quite a bit now. Although if I do want it any larger I will need to give it a slightly larger pot. I'm quite happy with how it is at the moment, and you can see the difference between the amount of flowers and the size of stems. If you have fewer stems you tend to have larger flowers, or floral displays should I say, as you can see here. And if you've got lots of smaller stems you just get lots of smaller ones, but what can happen is they can give a similar overall appearance. It's just the individual one smaller, such as this one for example. Lots of small flowers but it's covering the whole of the plant. This one only has two large ones and then some smaller ones here. Now these smaller ones are still growing, the flowers haven't opened yet, and there's quite a few smaller leaves, so this will continue to improve. And I would think this lower section here will be as covered as much as this larger section, and will look similar to how this one looks. Now there are two different varieties, so this one is the pure red one, this one is that mottled kind of pink and cream colour. So they've done really well. The high feed level has really helped with the colour intensity. You can see how dark and green the leaves are. That shows that there's plenty of nutrients and they're well fed. The high light levels as well will also help a bit with the extra colour. So you can see this is a really vibrant red now. The leaves were nice dark green before they started flowering, but it's nice vibrant red. And so basically now all I need to do is just enjoy them for the next month or two, and then come next spring I'll just go back into the same cycle again of cutting them back hard, allowing them to regrow, and then giving them that short day long night period to initiate flowering, get them ready for winter. And next year I can always choose if I want them bigger or smaller by either keeping the pot the same size and cutting them hard, maybe even a second cut in midsummer to keep them small, or if I wanted to get larger I could give this one an even bigger pot and allow it to grow further and get an even larger plant. So that's probably what I'll do next year. I might do update videos on that. I'll just be keeping this one smaller. This one I'm going to give it an even bigger pot and allow it to grow larger. But that's all for this video, and I'll keep you guys updated with updates as the year goes on, and I'll show you how these two plants develop over the years to come.